Hey, I'm Pastor Rhonda.
And I'm Pastor Seth.
You're listening to Growing Hope.
Living Faith. Hey guys, we're glad that you came back. We are so excited for you guys to hear this second part of the interview for Roger Kittle. We're going to get right into it, so enjoy listening. And I think you're right. A lot of it does go back to this mentality of discipleship. And I think the problem we have in a lot of churches is pastors aren't being discipled.
Yeah.
And if pastor doesn't have it modeled in their life, how, like you said, how can they then model that in someone else's life? And, you know, that's for me, you know, I struggle with that because I've gone to pastors before and requested for, you know, like, hey, can you journey with me? Can you walk with me? And it always starts out well, but then life gets in the way. And like I said, I'm not here to, discourage, but it takes intentionality. It takes effort. It takes time. It takes really being able to journey with somebody. And so I know that probably informed your next church as you kind of went into your next church, which was St. Elmo Baptist over here in St. Elmo. So tell us, how did you get from, I guess, there to there, and just kind of talk to us about, man, what did your church look like when St. Elmo look like when you got there? And then, man, what did it transition to? Yeah. Because the transition for you being there, I think, to where it ended up was definitely a pretty diverse reality.
Absolutely. When we left from the previous church and we were without a church for a year and actually moved to Lafayette, we thought we were going to be a part of buying a school building down there with a group of people and living in that school building and having housing and things for people that would need it and, you know, doing various types of ministry with that. That all kind of fell apart after we'd moved down there and I was preaching at different churches that would call and just ask me to come and fill in or do something. And actually in that year of time, I had 3 churches to ask me to be their pastor. And, and one of them we got real excited about and thought, and it was way out in the country. And in the process, it was like, you know, Lord, you've been teaching us something, you know, racially. And if I went to any one of those churches, as far out as they were, I don't think you helped us learn this lesson for no reason. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, so we just kept holding on. And anyway, God led us to the church in St. Elmo, and they weren't open to people different coming either. And just a handful of people, a sanctuary that hold 500. Mm-hmm. And they used to have over 500 people some years back. And
can you tell us a little bit, what did St. Elmo community look like when you went there?
Oh, when we went there, you know, it before us, years, you know, decades ago, it was a very elite community, you know, that had servants' quarters and various things, you know, in some of those huge houses, turn of the century houses. I don't know which century it would have been, but anyway,
right.
Now that we've crossed another one, but But by the time we got there, some of those huge houses you could have bought for $8,000 in back taxes.
Right.
And those houses today are selling well over $1 million. And it's just crazy how, but when we were there, it was typically about 40% black and nearly 60% white, and then, some Hispanic mixed into that as well. And so the church literally was saying to us as they met with us, they said, you know, we're dying and we don't know what to do. They had about 40 people sitting there, as white-headed as I am now. I wasn't that white-headed back then, but anyway, we were there 19 years as their pastor. But anyway, we just shared with them. I said, if you just become a community church, start reaching out to the people that are here. And I'd already shared with them what we had just gone through in the previous church. I said, look, I want y'all to know all this up front, and why they still voted on me to be their pastor, I don't know. But anyway, it was a God thing, I guess. But, in the process, though, we just shared that with them. And I said, that'll keep you from dying. Now, that's not why we should be reaching out. We should be reaching out because we have the answer to the needs of the people, not that they're the answer to our need of having people. And so, anyway, God used that, though. And like I said, we kept preaching there. They did vote on us to become their pastor, and a lot of changing things happened. But within about 7 years, we literally were reflecting the the makeup of the community, and that was that our church was about became about 40% black and white and Hispanic, and different things started happening. And we were reaching out to homeless people. God threw a biker gang in there at one point that I'm like, okay, this is crazy. And anyway, one of the neatest things I watched happen, there was a couple of people who got saved from a biker gang. I'm talking about not a very nice biker gang. And some of the people from that gang found out about these guys coming to this church. Well, it having black and white and Hispanic folks in it, they were giving them a hard time. Why would you go over there with that bunch of people? And so one morning, this one guy, he'd been in prison for shooting a man, and he's covered in tattoos and got a big old beard and long hair, and just I wouldn't want to meet him in a bright alley, let alone a dark alley. And but he'd come to faith, and we baptized him. He wanted to get baptized in Chickamauga Lake, the swimming area. And I'm like, well, it's December. And but he said, well, it's good enough for Jesus. And I'm like, yeah, but it wasn't December. But anyway, we did that. And 5 or 6 people got baptized that day. It was just incredible. But I watched him, though, when he first started coming to the church. And I knew he had a problem with people that weren't the same shade of, color that he was.
Right.
And this great big lady, black lady that was a part of our church, and just a precious soul. I saw him as everybody was shaking hands one Sunday morning, and here he stood, and I saw her going towards him, and I thought, okay, we're about to come to Jesus here with this whole scenario. And so what happened was I watched him stick his hand out to shake hands with her. She slapped his hand away and says, "We don't shake hands here, we hug." And she grabbed him in a big bear hug, and I'm not even breathing. I'm just looking at him from the pulpit, and it's like, and I watched his arms come up and pat her on the back and embrace her too. And I thought, wow, man, God is really in this place, and he's changing hearts, and what an awesome thing that God's doing. So, and in that, like I said, I never dreamed we'd ever leave from there. What God was doing, we watched different families come that would have never been welcome there, and God did some amazing things over the years. And like I said, with homeless people, that church was so big, we had a lot of classroom situations that hadn't been used in decades, and 2 sanctuaries, and anyway, God planted a Hispanic church in the smaller sanctuary within a couple of years after that, and it was just amazing to watch how God was using that whole facility there. But in the wintertime, the last 2 or 3 winters that we were there, we created some bedroom situations that where homeless folks could come and sleep, once it get freezing weather. And just, we loved doing that, my wife and I. Other people wanted to come and be like a house parent, right, there at night. And Carol and I, we slept more at the church the last 2 or 3 winters than we did in our own beds, and just loved being there. Had a place where we'd have common meals together and things, and just talking to folks, and it was just such a blessing. Never thought we'd ever leave from there. And then all of a sudden, through a series of events, God started saying into both of our lives, downsize and go. We had no understanding what even go meant, let alone where we were going. And but we kind of understood downsize, but not the going part. And God led us then to New Mexico.
Can you tell me a little bit more about, you said that you started looking at the community in St. Elmo. What does that exactly mean? And were you looking at the businesses, the schools, or when you started analyzing the opportunities around you, what did that look like?
Yeah, it literally was just the population that was there. It was the first 5+ years of being there was difficult, because even though people voted on me to be their pastor, and I even told them up front before they ever voted, I said, if you're asking us to be your pastor, I said, you're asking for these doors to be open to this community. And they had stopped reaching out years ago when they had 500 plus people, and literally stopped reaching out. And so, and of course, after 30 years, here they are with a handful of people, and they say, we're dying, we don't know what to do. And I said, well, let's become a community church again, like you used to be. Of course, the community was different when they were that. And so literally looking at one lady I met out in front of the church, we had a bench, and it was a bus stop there. And I pulled up one day, and, and a little white Ram truck that I had, and just always in blue jeans and tennis shoes, and just you wouldn't think I'd be the pastor,
right?
And pulled up one day, and I had somewhere I had to be, and some stuff I had to get done, and this lady, black lady, was sitting on the bench, and it was just like God said, pay attention to her, and I'm like, but I've got stuff, I've got to. Okay, and so I just walked over and said, hey, how are you doing? And just she began to tell me, I said, do you live here in the community? And she said, yeah, just around the block up here. And I said, well, that's great. I said, ma'am, do you go to church anywhere? And she said, well, yeah, we go over, and it's over in Brainerd somewhere. And in the process, she said, but my husband, he can't, it's getting harder for him to drive and see, especially at night or if it's raining. And I just told her, I said, I'm not trying to get you to leave your church. I said, but anytime you can't get to your church, I said, man, we'd love for you to come and be here with us. And when I said that, she looked at me and said, really? And because she had already had an experience before we came with folks there, and didn't feel very welcomed at all. Right. And probably be happier if you went somewhere else was kind of what was relayed to them. And she said, we would be welcome here. And I said, well, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, you would. And she said, are you sure? And I said, well, I'm the pastor. And I said, so yes, ma'am, I promise you'll be well. When I said I'm the pastor, she looked me up and down, my tennis shoes and blue jeans, and anyway. And, but anyway, her and her husband, anyway, she came the next Sunday, which was 2 days later, I think. And the next Sunday, she was there on a Sunday morning, and I just greeted her, and all. And I was just thrilled and that she was there. And then the next Sunday, her husband was there. And then after that, they came for years. And I even had him to come up, and he would read the morning scripture I was going to preach from. And it was just a neat thing watching that develop for them. But to watch how God turned that around, that people who were literally told they weren't welcome before we ever came. And again, it's not me that I did this. I mean, this is what God was doing. And I just was kind of hanging on with all my might to experience whatever was next. And all of these things were new to us, and but he kept giving us new experiences all the time. And we saw a lot of lives change.
It's so awesome. I know you said that the building over there was huge, and I'm excited to get into your move out west. But I know the building was huge, and I know that for a church that wasn't very big, it was a very big undertaking. It's part of the Historical Society, and so I know there was a lot of rules and all that kind of stuff. But I know there's several stories of God's provision for your church at St. Elmo Avenue Baptist. From when you're working with the homeless and kind of an impoverished community. And you think about, like you said, seats 500, and then, the classroom size, it's just, the church was, it's ginormous. Tell us some of the stories about God providing for you and your church over there at St. Elmo Avenue Baptist.
One thing I tell folks, we had a lot of people who left in the first 5 years. Literally everyone who was there before we came, and there was more than 40. People got on the phone and started calling folks, and all of a sudden that 40 turned into 100, 120. And it was faces. I'm like, who are you? And, where have you been? And some people hadn't been there in 10 years, 15 years, and they came back. And so we watched that happen. But by the end of the fifth year, everyone that was there but one person had left. Now, some died. I mean, because these folks, many were in their 80s and 90s, and we did a lot of funerals. And then some people moved out of town to be near their children so they could help better take care of them and things like that. But there was a vast group of people that started leaving just because they didn't like the folks that began coming. And we were reaching out we were on the edge of inner city, and the kids that we're bringing in there were not Sunday school kids, and they didn't, a lot of folks got cussed out by 5 and 6 year olds, and they didn't like, and of course a lot of folks left over things like that. But one thing that I realized, looking at the money coming in and that huge building and all the cost of that, literally, I can honestly say this, in the last 15 years of being there, I never saw enough money coming in from just the offerings to pay the bills. But we were never behind on a bill, not one time in those years. And that was a God thing. I got paid the salary they promised me, and our bills got paid. One time we had a $10,000 gas bill, and the janitor called me one morning and said, I just looked at this bill and it's $10,000. And I'm like, okay, what? And so I told him we had an old boiler system for heat that put in probably back in the 40s. I don't know. And I said, fire up the boiler. I'll be down there in an hour. I said, we got to figure out what's going on. And so he did. And if you know anything about condensation pumps, and it heats the water and it sends it through the piping system, the steam radiators and those kind of things. And we went down in the basement where nobody ever goes, where this thing's at, and it's been on for an hour, and it's pumping water and dumping it in the floor. And so it's just constantly heating the water. And so that's one reason. We sprayed soapy water on the meters, and on our side of the meter it was bubbling, so we're losing gas in the air, and we're dumping water in the floor. And so and outside where a pipe went over to one of the main buildings, there was a geyser coming up out of the pipe, and I thought, okay, shut it off. And we never turned it back on ever again. And we were like, okay, God, what we're supposed to do here? We called the gas company to see, is there anything we can work out or whatever? And knowing this problem and things happen, can you reduce the rate? Is that even possible? And they said, oh, no, there's nothing we can do. You'll just have to pay the bill. And I'm like, okay. And when we got another bill, though, it had been reduced by $1,000. So it was $9,000. So, okay, well, that made me feel no better. But anyway, because we didn't have 9,000 either. And anyway, we a little lady that a few years prior to this that lived in Atlanta, and happened to be a family that were black. Her husband was in a car wreck, and we met him in the hospital one time. I was walking to see somebody else and saw this family standing over in the corner, and they were all crying, in the lobby area. And I'm headed to see somebody, and it was like God said, no, pay attention to this family. And so we did, and went in, and her husband was in a coma. And anyway, and we prayed. They're playing gospel music, and they're anointing him with oil and praying and walking around in the room. And they just said, would you just pray for our brother, is what one guy said, and his little wife was there too. And we just prayed. And after that, the next Wednesday night, we were having service, and we're doing that in the old sanctuary back then. And all of a sudden, I was already up teaching a little bit, and that family, probably about 25 people walked in just all of a sudden, in the middle of me teaching. And it was like, stop what you're doing. Have them all come down front, gather around them, what few we had there, and just pray. Just pray for this man that's in the hospital. And, sadly to say that in a few weeks, they did that several times coming on Wednesday night. And, but in a few weeks, the husband died. And they invited us to go to Atlanta, a huge, big Black Baptist church down there, and, to help with the funeral. And we shared some things. And one of the first funerals I ever seen him were the wife of the husband that died. In the middle of the preaching, she just stood up and just shouted. And I thought, wow, I've never seen anything like this. And because she knew where her husband was. He was an amazing Christian witness of a man, and just loved God and loved his family. And they had a couple of little boys, 7, 8 years old, I think. And anyway, we're going to try to kind of keep up with them as best as we could over the years. And something happened. I changed phones or something, and I lost all the contact information. Couldn't find anything, and this went on for a few years. Well, that week after we got the bill for the gas bill, well, to back up for a minute, we on Sunday after getting this, before church, a couple of men and 2 or 3 of men in our church, they met me out in the lobby and preacher said, we've got a $10,000 gas bill, and what are we going to do? And I said to him, I'm not this smart. I mean, this had to be from God, because I don't come up with stuff like this. And I looked at him and I said, well, who does this building belong to? Yeah. And it's like I stood over here listening to somebody saying that, and they said, well, it's our building, and we've got it. And I said, no. I said, who does this building belong to? And they looked at me like, a calf looking at a new gate, just staring at me for a second. And one of them finally said, God? With a question mark. And I said, well, if it belongs to God, I said, well, then who does the gas bill belong to? They just stared at me again, and that same guy said, God? And I said, well, you know what? If it's God's gas bill, I said, I've never known God to be delinquent on anything that he owes. And I said, when he gets ready to pay his gas bill, he will. And I just turned and walked away. And I didn't look back, and I'm sure they were standing there looking at me or each other, and not, just in a daze. And my heart was pounding, and I walked down the hall to my office, and I literally said out loud, I said, okay, God, I heard what I just said. Did you hear what I just said? And that was on Sunday after church, actually, and went home. And then on Wednesday, my wife, she got a letter in the mail, and it was from that family in Atlanta. And so I'm sorry, she had called. And so I'm talking to this little lady who lost her husband a few years ago that we prayed for, and they came to the church on Wednesdays and all that special stuff that happened during that. And she said, listen, I'm calling because I need the address for the church. I got a little something I want to send to the church. And I said, well, first off, give me your, I've got your phone number here. It's on my phone now, I guess. And, but your address and everything. And I said, send me some pictures of your boys. I want to keep up with them. Anyway, I just said, I lost all your contact information. And she said, okay. So anyway, by Friday that week, Carol opened a letter, and here's pictures of her family and her boys and stuff, and it's just precious. And I'm like, wow. And she's reading the letter, to me, and as I'm looking at these pictures, and I look up at Carol, and she's crying, and I'm like, holy cow, somebody else died. I mean, what's happened? And she said, you got to see this check. And she handed me a check from that little lady, and it was for $15,000.
Oh, wow.
I immediately called her, and I said, Paige, I said, and I just said, I told her everything about the guys asking and whose building it is. I just told her the whole story. I said, $10,000 gas bill. And I said, and she said, well, you need to hear the rest of the story. And I'm like, okay, holy cow, what more can there be? And she said, this was like May of that year. And she said, I've had this money since September of last year. And she said, I had my check. I'm assuming it was probably an insurance settlement, and she was about to tithe off of that to her church, $15,000. And she said, I wrote out a check to my church. I'm making out bills, and I write this check to my church, and I'm about to sign it. And she said, Pastor Roger, I've never heard God's voice in my life. She said, but I heard him say, stop. And she said, I stopped. And it's like, okay, what? And then she just said, okay, until I hear anything else. She wrote void on that check. And she said, every month, and I have my checkbook out, September, October, November, December, January, February, March. No, March is when it was. And she said, every month she said I would, it finally was becoming a joke nearly to her. She said, I'd always say, okay, God, I still got your money. What do you want me to do with it? And she'd hear nothing, and so she didn't do anything. She said, I'm not doing anything till I hear you. And she said, the other day when I called you, she said, I heard God for the second time in my life. And she said, I had my checkbook out, and I almost jokingly said, okay, God, I still got your money. And she said, what I heard in my heart was, you remember that little church in Chattanooga that blessed you and your family? He said, send it to them. And she said, that's what I've done. And so anyway, things like that. And, I can attribute it. And again, not me. It's not about me. I mean, my goodness, I'm a knucklehead. And God proves he's God by using knuckleheads, I guess. But anyway, things like that time and time again. The one thing that we did as a church, because we kept seeing God doing so much. And again, this is not because I'm this smart, because I'm not. If people needed something, even out of our little, we gave to them. You talked about a big building. When people needed to use the building, and I know, and this is not being negative against churches, and I understand you got to pay bills and do stuff, but what God was doing for us was miraculous. But we never rented any space to anybody, never, there was a homeschool association, and they were meeting up on the mountain somewhere, and that church changed pastors, and he didn't see the need for having this homeschool association meet at their church 4 mornings a week from 8 o'clock till noon and take up several classrooms. And they heard that we had a lot of classrooms, and so the lady came to see us, and when she came in the fellowship hall. Just happened to be down there, and we're talking. She said, hey, and told me the whole story. We've lost the place, and we need I understand you have classrooms. I said, yes, ma'am, we do. And she said, I'm just wondering, what would you rent 2 or 3, 4 of those rooms to us for 4 mornings a week? And I said, oh, I'm sorry, ma'am, we don't rent classrooms. And she said, oh, she just panicked and said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I bothered you. And she started to walk away. I said, whoa. I said, wait a minute. I didn't say you couldn't be here. I said, we don't rent classrooms. If God wants you to be here, this is not my building. It belongs to him. And I said, if he wants you to be here, I said, then you'll be here. And just tell me what you need. And they were with us for years until I left. And the church that we merged, we literally gave the building to another church that wanted to plant a church in St. Elmo, and everything we were doing was what they wanted to do. And so that worked out great. And we just gave them the building, and God's blessing that for a new age of people that, that they're reaching out to. But, things like that, we would, never rent space, and just whatever people need, and sometimes giving people things that we needed, and God always blessed us. And again, I'm not a prosperity gospel preacher by no means, but God was taking care of what was going on in that place. And just an amazing story of what, and never thought we'd ever leave from that. But again, God had some different ideas.
I do have a question about that church, and also the one before. You were talking about how people over the years had left and the church was dying and there were only a few people. You were down, I think, to like 40, and I'm not sure where the other church where, the attendance had dropped down to. And then you had the resurgence where people were coming back and that kind of thing. So how, when your numbers drop drastically like that, a lot of your resources go out the window. And I hate to even use the word programs, but what I have seen is like when churches get smaller, people like young families with kids, they want to go to churches that's got the exciting youth programs and the exciting children's and great music. And a little bitty church doesn't, they and I don't even want to use the word compete, but that's the word that's coming to my mind.
Sure.
But how do you continue to, I don't know, attract isn't the word either, but how do you get those young families to be the first ones to come back with the only kids that's in the church, where you only have 2 or 3 or 4 kids? Is that something you just leave up to the Lord and you just keep praying for salvation and he just works all that out? Because it just seems like, a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to go there because the music is horrible, or, there's nothing for my kids. And there's such a consumer mentality in our day and age. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it's something we deal with as a smaller church that has experienced decline.
The answer goes back about discipling and the reason that we have become this in America. We've created something we call church that you can't find any element hardly when you open the Bible. But this is where we are, and like you said, we have to deal with where we are. It's not just a matter of saying, "Oh, that's all wrong," and you can't. But my only approach has been, I got to a place where if people came forward and wanted to join our church, I asked them 2 questions. First off, I stopped asking people, "Have you ever been saved?" Because you can knock on the door at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning and wake somebody up not being in church and say to them, "Hey, have you ever been saved?" And they would look at you and say, "Oh, yeah, I did that when I was a kid. I prayed that prayer and they dunked me in the water." And yeah. But if you went in, you couldn't find a Bible with a search warrant. I mean, and it's like, and they're never, don't want to be around church folks and whatever. So I stopped asking people, "Have you ever been saved?" What I started asking later in life was, do you right now have a personal, intimate, life-changing relationship with the man named Jesus? Now, when you look, the people that would have said, "Have you ever been saved?" And they said, "Oh, yeah." When you ask it that way, they go, okay, life-changing, personal, intimate relationship with the man named Jesus of Nazareth. They would say, "Well, I need to get back with you on that one because I'm not real sure." Now, that was the one question I asked. The other question I ask is, can you tell me, or you want to join this church, can you tell me the reason you want to join? And let me just ask the question. Have you prayed, and you're telling us you have prayed about joining this church, asking God, is this where you want me to worship and serve you? Most people never ask that. But they say, well, they've got a good youth program. They got, man, I love that music. And I love, well, that preacher, he is, And then when the preacher changes or the music changes, I'm out of here. That's not, you can't find that in the Bible either. I mean, on the positive side, you can find it on the negative side. And so, yeah, I mean, it is difficult. And the struggles of that, we've seen for years. But again, I want to honor God. I don't want to. I don't want to create something that will attract people. In all honesty, the church was never designed for people to come to. It was designed for believers to gather. And when we gather, then I mean, it's like the pep rally, and and it's the here's the manual that we're going to look into, and what. One thing our church where we attend in New Mexico. our pastor started doing this. At the end of every message, he'll ask, and even in the bulletin, it'll say, "I will," and then there's a blank. And he says, based on what you've just heard in this message, what will be different in your life this week according to God's word that you've just received? And, then the "I will," he says, pray about it and fill that in. And then next week, look at it again and say, how did you do, on that? Mm-hmm. And so the Word of God is alive, and it changes our lives. And we're bored with it on Sunday morning because we got to get to, I started to say Shoney's. I don't know, is there even a Shoney's anymore? But, that we've got to go eat, and we got to get back to our life, and the ball game's coming on, and the races are about to start, and I've got to be at grandma's. And it's like, that's discipleship in the churches. Over the past 35 years or more, I look back at, and I don't always prayer journal, but I've done it some, but every time I look at it, I see the word disciple and discipling, and I'm like, wow. But in every church I've ever been in, the best discipleship ever became was a 6-week Sunday school lesson, and when you get through with that, I remember specifically going through. I'm stumbling, fumbling, trying to figure it out because it was never done for me. And what do I do? And what's it look like? And we did a class on it, and we got through. And a young man looked at me and said, "Pastor," said, "what's next?" Now, I didn't have anything to say, and I said, "We'll figure it out." But if he asked me that today, I'd say there is no next. Yeah. This is us. Everything that we think, say, and do should come out of the fact that we're following Jesus, and He is making us to become fishers of men. And in that, discipleship begins talking to men even before they come to faith in Jesus. That you're just having a conversation, and one of the things that I'll ask people, and I don't know whether they're believers or not. Maybe I know they don't even go to church or whatever, and I've started asking a couple of questions to them, and that is, if I can have a conversation, certainly I'm not asking them, tell me your come to Jesus story, but I'm asking them now things like, in the past week, tell me one thing you're most thankful for. Now, nothing about God in that, but, hey, my kids were sick, but now they're good, or my mama was in the hospital and and I'm like, wow, that's awesome. But then I'll ask another question. This is becoming the thermostat. You're in control. We need to take control of conversations, not just start with our hobbies and grandkids and then 2 hours later, you're like, I ain't said nothing about God. Yeah. But you have to be intentional in being ready for these conversations. And so the other question I'll ask is, wow, that's amazing, what you're most thankful for. And that's a great story. And thank you. Bless me. But then to ask, well, think about this in the past week or month or, however far back you got to reach. What's one thing that's caused you the most concern, troubled you the most, maybe even freaked you out stressed you to the point of, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I've had people share with me, this, and then how do you keep being the thermostat in that? You know what, man, is it okay if I pray for you? And, and I've never had anybody say, oh, no. It's like, no, I'm not, they're grasping for straws, yeah, you can pray for me. And, but so, again, we have to take control of the conversations and be ready to give an answer for the hope that lies within us. And I love talking to people. You go to a restaurant and the waiter, his name is Daniel, and you say, wow, you got a Bible name. Did you know that? And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't, but then later, and, just talking with them, being nice to them and whatever, and say, you got a Bible name, but do you have a Bible heart? I said, because God can change our lives. He's changed mine. And you say things like that, and just to open up conversation, to say to a waiter or waitress, hey, we're about to say the blessings. Is anything that we can remember you in prayer about? And we've had people say, no, walk off, and that's fine. Yeah. But we've had people stand there in tears for 10 minutes. And I'm like, I know you got other tables and people are mad because their tea is empty. But it's okay. And, but, just to bless people and just to be generous with people.
Wow, this has been so good. I've been inspired to not underestimate the power of prayer and not underestimate the power of love and how God can do great things in our churches and in our ministries when we love people. And I'm thankful for this. And also, I really appreciate the fact that he has pointed out that discipleship is about just taking advantage of normal, everyday conversations and activities and just talking about Jesus. It's been so good. Well, we have 2 more episodes because now he's going to share how he was called to New Mexico to work with the Navajo Indians. So it's getting even better, and you'll see his heart for discipleship continue into what's next for him. So stay tuned. Make sure you download the next 2 episodes.